Okay, hi everybody. I see some people are starting to trickle in here. Welcome. We'll wait just another minute here before we get started. And as you come into our webinar here, feel free to enter into the chat where you're coming from and what you're farming. I think we're getting quite a larger reach than we normally do since we're online here. So I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Sara Tiffany, and I work for the Community Alliance with Family Farmers. We are a California agriculture nonprofit based in Davis, California, and but work quite a bit statewide, though I will say that this particular webinar today is going to be pretty Northern California, Sacramento Valley focused. We're going to be talking about spring cover crop management in orchards, and primarily in nut orchards, though I think it's fair to say that many of the principles that we're going to be talking about today and the important things to think about will be applicable to a lot of different cropping systems. This particular project has been, is part of our Healthy Soils demonstration project, which is funded by the California Department of Food and Ag. So wanted to say thanks to them. And I also wanted to mention that, so at CAFF, we've done a lot of different kind of work in cover cropping over the years with a lot of different growers. And at this moment, we are part of a really great network that we're trying to build up in the Sacramento Valley called the Orchard Cover Crop Support Network. And there's a lot of great partners in that network. Some of them I think will be joining today, and I won't mention all of them because it's a very long list, but there are quite a few other organizations working in sustainable ag, as well as local RCDs, UC Cooperative Extension, and NRCS. So want to say hello and thank you to all those folks. I did want to mention that this webinar is being recorded, and so if you can't stay for the whole thing, that's all right. We will be, after the webinar, once we get the video, we'll probably tomorrow we'll be sending out an email with the recording with some resources on cover cropping, if for folks that want to go ahead and take the next step, as well as an evaluation. I know evaluations aren't everyone's favorite, including mine, but this is the first cover crop webinar that we're doing, and we want to know if we should do more. So please go ahead and fill out that eval when you get it. The last thing that I wanted to mention is that we really want to hear from you all, what your questions are, what your experiences are. So after we hear from our panelists today, we're going to have a question and answer session. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a Q&A button you can push. Excuse me. And I would encourage you all to submit questions throughout the webinar as you think of them. Excuse me. And if you would like to direct any questions to one of the particular speakers, feel free to write that in the Q&A box. And once we get to the Q&A section, we will go ahead and go through all those questions. We also have some things that were submitted ahead of time if we don't have enough questions. So please go ahead and chime in and let us know what you're trying to figure out, what you're curious about. If you're trying to troubleshoot a problem with your cover crop, we want to know, and we're here to help. So with that, I'm going to just start introducing our speakers here. We have Tom Johnson from Kamprath Seeds, who is going to give us kind of an overview on some of the really important things to think about cover cropping in general and also in spring management. We have Daniel Unruh, who is a walnut grower in Colusa County. We have Nick Edsall, who is the orchard manager for Bullseye Farms in Yolo County. And they grow a lot of nut trees as well as a number of other crops. And we have Alan Siegle, who is a walnut grower also in Colusa County. So we are very Sacramento Valley focused, like I mentioned. But we are really, I think, hopeful that everything we'll talk about today will be applicable to folks. So let's go ahead and start with you, Tom. If you want to, looks like you're sharing your screen here.
I'm playing with buttons. How's that? So. Okay.
I'm sorry. Do you have slide? Are you sharing slides?
No, I'm just doing it off the cuff today, like I usually do. So.
Yeah. So you want to stop sharing your screen.
Okay. As soon as I figure out how. Share screen.
So there should be a stop share button there. It's red.
Oh, there it is. Okay. If I read the directions, yeah.
Okay, go away.
Good morning to whoever's out there. My name's Tom Johnson. I work for a wholesale seed company that specializes in cover crop seed in California. And so being the agronomist, I get to cover a lot of territory. I've worked with all three of our growers today. I've worked with Sara quite a bit as well on a lot of different cover crop projects. And we're going to kind of concentrate on spring management and nuts. And I had kind of 3 points I wanted to cover, and then for things to think of and things to think about when you're going into putting in a cover crop. We usually preach have a goal, have an idea what you want to accomplish, and then we can figure out what to put out there to accomplish that. So come springtime, things are growing. You're looking at your trees budding out and you're trying to figure out what to do. So you need to remember what your goals were. If you wanted water infiltration, you may have achieved that already. If you wanted something else, you got to figure, okay, have I got to wait for that or not? So remember what your goal is that you started out with. Now you can change in the middle of the stream if you want, but if that was what you're after, continue chasing that. That's an economic choice you made to do that. Then basically when you get into it, understanding what management techniques is going to take to accomplish what you want. If you're after a lot of biomass that you're going to disc in a young orchard, hey, let it grow. If you are after water infiltration or you're after field access, then your techniques are going to be different. And you need to kind of know what equipment you have, what you're going to need to do what you need to do. Going out and trying to chop down a 6-foot cover crop with a machete and a crew full of people with pruning shears is not the way to do it. But probably the biggest trick most growers have, and most people that start out with cover crops, and it's tough even when you've done it for a while, is just be patient. This year was a great example. It didn't rain in January and February. Things did not grow. So come March, things finally started to rain, things started to grow. I saw a lot of people out there mowing their cover crops the first part of March when they could have benefited by waiting 3 weeks. So you got to be flexible. You got to be patient. Try not to be calendar bound. If you have bazillions of acres to cover, then maybe you do need to be calendar bound. But you don't necessarily have to say on the first, I'm going to start mowing. That may be a mistake. Whereas if you waited a little while, maybe you'd have a better outcome. If you're in a reseeding clover mix, you want to let it flower. You want to let it dry up. You may want to mow it early to limit your weeds, but you want to let it bloom. In other words, don't go out 2 days after the crimson clover gets done and start mowing it. You will be disappointed at what you get next year. So those are kind of the things that at this time of the year are amongst all the other things to remember. It's okay. What did I do this for in the first place? Am I getting that back? Do I have the equipment I have to do to get what I want out of it? And do I need to do it this week, or can I wait a week or two? And I'm sure that will bring up a lot of questions. Well, what about this? What about that? And unfortunately, in all of agriculture, the standard answer is it all depends. So that's kind of my little spiel on this thing. We'll answer questions here in a little bit, I'm sure, but that's what I have to say.
Great, thank you, Tom. I'm sure we'll have quite a few questions for you towards the end. Daniel, would you like to go ahead and share your experience with us?
Okay, just as an introduction here, I moved to California in 2006 as a single man, and in 2010 to 2012, I took over a walnut orchard here in northern Colusa County. I had a nematode problem that we didn't realize that we planted into, and that put me on a journey, because you can't fumigate with nominal fumigants in a current growing system. So I started checking out alternatives, and I found out that the vegetable productions systems across the state, Field, Salinas Valley, northern Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, where there's lots of vegetable production. They all harvest their crop, and then they take and plant a brassica cover crop to mitigate or help control their plant parasitic nematodes. And so that was kind of an aha moment for me when I was sitting in the tractor, that a little more background on it. There's something in the labeling program, I think it's kind of stuck there right now. It's a mustard derivative that has showed extremely good success in the control of nematodes, plant parasitic nematodes. But they said that they could get me some, but it would probably be for about 10 trees. And then after that was when I had my aha moment of, well, why couldn't I plant the mustards and the radishes, the brassica blends? So that's what I did. In 2013, I believe, was my first cover crop. And I had an extremely poor stand, but the stand I did have grew fairly prolifically and filled in actually quite well. I took a nematode sample the following June, and my numbers were cut by 40% roughly. And that seems to be almost what I have found on my farm. That's almost completely consistent through all the years of me growing brassicas. Now, in fall of 2018, I had all 3 samples of my nematode samples came back as no plant parasitic nematodes found. Now, I must explain that. I don't believe that's true as a broad spectrum across my farm. Where we tested, there wasn't any. But to completely eradicate something like that would be extremely difficult, and I'd have to say that I can't say that you can just totally eradicate something like that. But nevertheless, I have seen an increase in tree health, and over the years, I have planted very diverse mix. Currently, my mix that I had out there this year, I had about 19 different species in that. ranging from grasses, bell beans, peas, and vetch, and some plantain, chicory, some phacelia, mustards, triticale, oats, barley, and there's varieties in that. I think I had 3 different mustards and like 4 different oats or something like that. So anyway, that kind of gives you an idea what I did this year. Next year it'll probably be different. Most likely will, actually, because I'm trying to target my specific needs. This year I'm also doing something different. I would like to put animals out in my orchard, but they're not letting me do that at this point because of food safety, because I'm selling to a nominal buyer and or an average buyer. And so I decided this year, instead of rolling all of my cover crop down, I would roll two aisles and skip one, 2 aisles and skip one, so that I could encourage my turkey population. I don't know how that's exactly gonna work, but I can irrigate and not cause harm with being able to spread that. It's not, but come summertime, those birds are going to need to eat. So why wouldn't I encourage my natural poultry population? Being I'm by the river and I've got about 4 flocks of turkeys on my farm. So why wouldn't I foster that sort of thing? I don't know where that's going to end up, but that's a little bit of my management for right now. I might think it's a complete flop here after a while. But nevertheless, I do have some pictures down that I had let's see. If I can get it here. There we go. Okay.
Daniel, you'll want to go ahead and click on one of those pictures one at a time, I think, so we could see them.
Okay. No, I may have. Oh, sure enough, here we go.
There you go.
So that was my cover crop this year. That I rolled down about the 17th of April. So that gives you an idea of how tall it was. That is how it looked after I wanted to give y'all a shot of the tree row into the next aisle up against one that was rolled, so that it gave you a perspective. There's in my tree row, that is a lot of burr clover. The majority of that is burr clover. And that's actually a really nice low growing ground cover that naturally occurs that will help you out with some fertility needs. That photo there, I used my 12-foot tape measure that I carry with me. I just set that on the ground just to give people an idea of how thick a mat that I'm decomposing on my orchard floor. Now, towards the end here, I will show you some pictures that there's some of the grasses that weren't mature enough to roll that have stood back up, and they are growing. And I actually kind of like that because I didn't kill my burr clover, and that burr clover and the grasses really go along good together. It seems like they complement each other. There's another photo of into an adjacent row. And just to show you a little bit how tall it was about 6 to 7 feet tall. This is my father-in-law's orchard. That's about a 30-year-old Hartley orchard. And that's how tall that was. So I went to one of my neighbors here the other day, yesterday, that have been doing regenerative ag. This is actually in a Howard block. And they actually used a shredder and mowed it real high to where they just took the tops and they shred it off and let it lay in large chunks in the remaining plant structure that was there. That seems to actually be working fairly well when it comes to keeping an aerobic decomp atmosphere. I don't know that it would work quite as well as what the roller crimper does, but nevertheless, it's a very good option to do something with something that you already have. That is a photo there of more of a long-term view of that same Howard block. And then you can see that there's some stuff that was run down. Is just laying down in the on the soil surface there. So my my tree rows look pretty bad. This was last year, and probably the worst spot in my field. But when it actually came to harvest time, that stuff all killed down very, very, I would say mid-spring. I actually went through with a herbicide and sprayed some of it, but that amount of cheeseweed, you can't really you can't get enough coverage to kill it. But when it comes time to harvest, I know what people are thinking right now. They're thinking, well, what in the world did you do about harvest time? Well, that stuff was decomposed far enough at the soil surface to where some of it was gone already. Some of it had naturally laid over. When the sweeper came along, it just blew right out of the row. It didn't stay there. My orchard row, my tree rows were quite clean after we'd been through and harvested. And being they had been dead for as long as they had been, being they were as dead as long as they had been, they hadn't, there was almost no body left. They were still stuck, the plants were still stuck together, but once it went through the sweeper head, it just went to pulp. So that's a little closer up picture there. I don't like that necessarily, but at this point in time, I'm trying to minimize my sterilant sprays if I can. And I don't know if this is going to be a long-term fix or not, but there is other options out there also. So this is this morning. That's what my tree rows look, or my aisles look like currently. There's another picture. Now this photo right here, that's all burr clover down there in and amongst that grass, and it's actually probably about 8 to 10 inches tall right now. I don't have any tall grass out there. If we back up here, you can see that all of my grasses are less than 18 inches. So in my mind, I like this kind of situation right here. It gives ground cover. It's still sequestering nitrogen for me, and my ground is covered, and actually the plants are pushing out root exudates, which feed biology, and that's what we're after. and then there's my roller crimper. So that's a little bit where I'm at. The whole goal is to get nature and to get the biology to do the majority of the work, and we manage it. But to manage it like that, you have to manage it like that, you must understand how it works. And I don't know if we as farmers will ever completely understand how it all works. So we're gonna learn until the day we quit farming. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, and thanks for showing us some pictures. I didn't realize you're gonna have photos for us, but great to see, especially some results of a roller crimper, which I believe you built that roller crimper, right?
Yes, that's correct. And I do, this isn't a sales pitch here, but I do build rollers custom to order. So.
All right, well, folks get interested. Great, so yeah, roller crimpers are, it's interesting, a really kind of evolving technology right now, particularly in organic agriculture and no-till agriculture, where folks are trying to minimize their tillage, but also their herbicide use. So that's a really interesting way of spring management that, you know, you get the continued benefits of the roots being in the topsoil. And there's a lot of benefits associated with soil structure and water infiltration, not to mention, like Daniel said, you're continuing to feed that biology. So with that, let's go ahead and jump on to Nick Edsall from Bullseye Farms. Nick, do you want to go ahead and join us and share your slideshow with us?
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, let me share my screen real quick. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah, you're gonna want to go ahead and make it into presentation mode.
Oh, I see here what's going on. All right, how's that?
Looks
So
good.
I'm Nick with Bullseye Farms. I'm the orchard manager here. We farm almonds, walnuts, and pistachios. There's a list of our cropping systems that we actually put cover crops into. All of our orchard crops, as well as our tomatoes, we're trying to do more cover cropping in the tomatoes. It's a little more challenging on a crop that you have to plant right into the ground in the spring. But we worked a little bit with that this year with some success. And of course, it was a good spring for it with the weather we had. Last year would have been a little tougher, but we're planting, depending on the situation, we're using either single species cover crops like a single grass or grain. Triticale is one we like to use that has a massive root system and does a lot to open up the ground and cover the ground to prevent weeds from growing. And then for general soil health, for the general soil health, we're using some multi-species mixes that usually consist of some kind of grain mix, some brassicas, and some legumes. And depending on the the crop we're in, we'll play around with the different mixes. Some crops like pistachios that are more susceptible to plant bug damage, we might leave out the brassicas because they attract different plant bugs, especially ligas, things like that. So that's something that we have to take into account whenever deciding what we want to plant, kind of look at what our goals are, and then also potential problems we might have with insect pests, or even just harvest. Almonds, we knock to the ground and sweep up to harvest, so we need a fairly clean floor. Walnuts are big and round and they roll and they're easier to sweep, so a little bit of residue on the ground is not too big of a deal for us. And pistachios harvest into a catch frame, they never touch the ground, so residue doesn't matter at all at harvest. So depending on the crop, that kind of dictates our options to us. So this is just, this is about spring management techniques. So I'm just gonna go right into kind of the tools we use and different methods of controlling our cover crop. So this, to have a video here, which is basically, we went way too heavy on our mustard. This is actually a mix, and it's a blend. We have 2 hoppers on our planter, and we put mustard in the back hopper. And, you know, if mustard gets planted at, you know, 1 or 2 pounds per acre is quite a bit of mustard. So if you mess up and you go 3 or 4, your percentage has increased quite a bit, and you got a lot more seed out there. So anyway, it turned out just fine. We got a lot of biomass, as you can see, and this is how we handled. Oh, didn't let me. Oh, there we go. So we actually purchased a rotary mower to help us out with some of our crops that get out of hand. So a flail mower that we usually use would take us a really long time to get through that, and a lot more horsepower. So for the first mowing in the spring, we try to use a rotary mower that we can get through really quickly with, cover a lot of ground with less horsepower, you know, saving money, using a lot less diesel. To get through this field, normally we'd probably use three mowers, flail mowers, and that would take us probably a day to get through this with 3, and we can get through it in a day with 1 rotary mower. So purchasing that this year made it a lot easier for us, and gives us options also of, we can kind of give our cover crop a haircut without just completely knocking it out. So here's a couple of photos of where we did that. This one on the right here is actually that same orchard that you just saw in the video. That's kind of what it looks like after the rotary. After that, we had, there's some grasses planted in there. I think oats and some barley and some vetches that are planted, some peas. And after we mowed that, we got a lot of those to kind of grow back and come up through that. Not as much as we would have liked to, just because we overdid it on the mustard. We would have had better luck if we would have had a quarter of the rate of mustard seed. On the left is a walnut orchard that we basically had a blend, a similar blend with a lot less mustard. And we went through and mowed it down, and that's probably about a 6 to 8 inch mowing. And that was early spring, and then we got more rains after that. So since then, everything had come back and started to flower. And we hit it again basically with the flail mower after the cover crop started flowering, because we had some weeds out there that we kind of wanted to knock out, and we felt like the cover crop had kind of done its job. So so first first we used the rotary mower, then went to the flail. Let's see, here's the rotary mower running out in that field. That's basically the same mower. So real fast and easy. That tractor is actually overpowered for that mower. I think that mower requires like a 60 horsepower tractor, and the tractor that we're using there is like 115 or 120. So you know, if you size the tractor down, you can really get through your fields inexpensively. So there's the flail. I didn't have any pictures of our flail, so I just pulled that off of Rear's website. But that's basically what we use when we're flail mowing. And here's some pictures of, this is the same orchard where we had that real heavy mustard. On another part of that orchard, we're doing a demonstration plot with CAFF and Project Apis M, and we had a soil blend in that orchard, and we mowed that down with the rotary mower at the same time that we did the mustard on the other part of the field. And then this is actually after maybe a month after we mowed it down with the rotary mower, we decided to kind of terminate the crop, basically because we didn't want some of the mustards and radishes going to seed. The idea of a reseeding cover crop is nice, but in this case, you saw that mustard. We don't want that to multiply exponentially and have to deal with that later. So we decided to go out, you know, basically terminate the cover crop. And if you go out there right now, you'll still have a lot of the grasses are actually kind of growing back, which is fine because they don't cause any kind of problem for us. And but it's basically the same treatment here. On the right is just kind of a close-up view of the mat. It kind of leaves a blanket on the soil, protects the soil during the spring. Having all the roots in the ground help with infiltration and help to aerate the soil, but having the mulch on top helps us keep the moisture in the spring and actually keeps weeds from growing. So that works out pretty well for us. We can probably leave the orchard like that. We might mow it when the grasses kind of dry out enough that they're not going to come back. We might go back through with that rotary mower really quickly and mow as close to the ground as we can with it. And then after that, the rest of the summer, we won't have many weeds growing in the middles. So we'll save a lot of money on mowing and spraying during the summer. We also have a crimper that we made in the shop last year. And here's a similar mix that we actually planted this. It was like at the very end of December. We went and drilled it in. I remember it was real frosty and it almost looked like snow. I took a picture because it looked like it had snowed out there, but it was just frost. We were planting into that. And we still got a lot of the seed to germinate, and some of this is volunteer. Some of the mustards and vetch came up volunteer. And it, like Tom said, it kind of sat there for a couple months. It germinated and it was there and it didn't do much. And then as soon as it, you know, got enough heat units, I guess, and a little bit of rain, then it took off. And that's what we have. Oh, it keeps doing that whenever I try to play the video. So the crimper roller is basically, you know, that's going to be your cheapest, quickest method of knocking down the cover crop. So we'll use that crimper roller when we want to basically kind of keep a mulch on top of the ground, try to save, you know, time and money running a mower. and, you know, get some of the cover crop to come back. And it kind of leaves more out there for your beneficials, that kind of thing. It leaves a great cover on the ground, but like in a situation like almonds where you need to have a pretty clear floor at harvest, that a lot of times won't be an option. If we're going to go through a field like this and maybe spread some granular fertilizer or do something where the crop is just too tall, the roller crimper is great because you can knock a lot of it out. The roller crimper works best when you have a pretty solid stand and the crop is kind of at maturity. It'll knock it out and kind of kill it at that point. If you do it early, it'll knock it down and a lot of the crop will come back up, which sometimes is what we want. So we kind of just time our rolling to what our goals are and kind of the stage of the crop. If we think it's getting a little out of hand and we want to just get it knocked down, we'll go in a little bit earlier. So that's just the close to the after picture. Our roller crimper with the hoses there, we kind of have to go 2 passes per row to get it all to knock down. That's what we did here. So that's just the picture of the same row. The close up, you can kind of see the mature grasses kind of chopped up, and a lot of the ones that are far along are not going to come back, and some of the stuff was a little bit shorter or further behind in maturity will actually grow back. So before we had our crimper roller, we were working on it in the shop, and we wanted to roll down some cover crop and walnuts. And we said, well, let's just go try a ring roller. See, this was to spread fertilizer. So we just needed to knock it down just long enough to get the spreader out there and not have the cover crop kind of grab all the granules as they spread across the orchard. So it would spread evenly. So we took this out there, and it worked pretty well for what we were doing. The roller just, it does some of the same work as the crimper roller, but you're going to get more of it coming back. So did it again. I don't know why it doesn't like me press and play. So simple and fast. Usually the faster you go, the better. And it just is a quick way of knocking that out so you can kind of do other cultural practices if you need to. Or even just kind of with the mustard, that's kind of what was flowering and growing tall. So mustard seems to break at the stalk and even kind of sometimes get pulled out of the ground more easily with those rollers. So we kind of wanted to knock the mustard back, but keep everything else growing. And the ring roller did a good job for us. So talked a little bit about it, but the key factors when we're deciding when to terminate the crop, weather is one. So every year is different. This year, you know, we didn't get a ton of rain in the spring, but we just kept getting small rains that just kept the cover crop moving along. The cover crop was established really late in a lot of places. So like Tom was talking about, to get the benefits out of it, we tried to keep it around as long as we could. So that's why we did some of the rotary mowing to kind of make the orchard look nice, basically, and even and knock back anything that was getting out of control, but keep all the later blooming stuff like some of the peas and vetches, keep them growing and there for soil health and you know, for the bees. A year like last year where it was really wet during the spring, we basically were trying to get on the ground as quick as we could to get the cover crop knocked back. At this time last year, you know, things were still wet. So it's a complete different story. During the drought, you might want to knock out the crop early just to preserve some of your soil moisture before your ground turns really hard. So that's weather. So cultural practices, like I talked about the fertilizing. If you have to get in and do some kind of operation that your cover crop kind of impedes, then you want to get the cover crop either knocked down or mowed. So you know, pruning and shredding brush. We'll prune, and then right before we stack the brush, we might knock down the middle of the cover crop with the ring roller so we can get the shredder in there and not cause a lot of problems with the shredder kind of catching in the mustard or whatever else is growing out there. Another thing to take into account is insects, the beneficials that are out there that you want to keep around, and pests that might be developing that you don't want around. So this year, walking around out in the cover crops, there's just a lot of beneficials, ladybugs, lacewings, all kinds of, you know, pollinating bees and flies out there that we want to keep around. So when we go to knock out the cover crop, we try to keep enough there where we keep some habitat for those. In pistachios, a lot of ours are young, so we're not too worried about plant bugs, but as they get into production, we might want to knock out, if there's any mustard that comes up voluntarily, or you know, even some of the peas and vetch might attract some plant bugs. So we probably want to knock those out before they start developing seeds. So soil conditions, I talked about, just if things are getting way too dry and we just get the feeling that we probably want to conserve some soil moisture, we might knock the crop out early and use like a flail mower that kind of takes the crop out and doesn't let it grow back. If things are really wet, then you know, you don't want to get on the ground and pack it. With cover crops, that's one advantage, is you can kind of run equipment through without packing the ground too much. But if it's wet enough, you will, and you don't want to run out there too wet. So waiting just for the conditions to be right kind of dictates when you might go out and terminate the cover crop. And then harvest requirements. I mentioned the 3 different tree crops we have, and with walnuts and pistachios, I feel like we don't really need to take harvest into account most of the time, because our walnuts have like solid sprinklers. If we get it knocked down late, we can turn sprinklers on. We will turn sprinklers on for irrigation. And as soon as all that material gets wet, it doesn't take long for it to start breaking down. And one pass with a flail mower before harvest will get us into good condition for harvest. With almonds, it's a little different. Some places where we have a really nice smooth floor and our ground holds together, we try to knock the cover crop back a little bit earlier, so we don't have a lot of residue there. Some of the places where our soil is really bad, we actually want more residue, because it actually helps when we go to sweep to bring the nuts into the windrow, and the harvester actually can clean out the residue from the cover crop pretty well. The disadvantage is you might have to drive a little bit slower with the harvester, but it's better than losing nuts, because the ground is uneven and some of our heavy clays crack and nuts actually go in the cracks. So having the cover crop out there helps us to prevent the cracks, but also if there is any cracks or crumbly soil, because that heavy soil, a lot of times if you float it down, it crumbles and leaves a lot of dirt on the top, and that's really hard to take the harvesters through. So if you have residue there, it actually makes it easier to get those nuts into the windrow, and then you're picking up nuts and residue instead of nuts and soil, which is actually speeding you up. So some of the things we think about when deciding when to terminate, and that's basically all I have in regards to that. So we can answer questions later.
Thanks, Nick. A lot of really good food for thought there. I think I know towards the end, I'd love to hear more about when to decide when to mow and when to roller crimp. And I think people are wondering a lot about ground management once we get to our Q&A section. But let's go ahead and go to our last speaker, Alan Siegle from AA Walnuts in Colusa. And I have some pictures that Alan sent me, so I'm going to go ahead and put those up on the screen, but you can just go ahead, Alan.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. We started farming in Colusa on a walnut orchard in about 2006, about the same time Daniel came to Colusa County. The orchard had been abandoned for several years prior to us purchasing it. So we did have, and about half of the land was planted, half was fallow. So shortly after purchase, I think 2006 and 7, we replanted a lot of the ground, pulled out some of the older trees and replanted new trees. And since that time, over the last 6 years, we've converted a significant portion of the ranch to organic production. We, at this point, between certified and transitional, about more than half the ranch is in organic. The back portion of the ranch, we're on the east side of the Sacramento River in Colusa off River Road. The back portion of the ranch, we had replanted, I think, in 2007. And when we've had innumerable problems in that back block, which is about 35 acres. When we first started working it, it was just overrun with ground squirrels. And we got that under control, but still we found that a lot of the replants that we were putting in just weren't growing. Long story short, it took us years. Sounds like Daniel figured it out much quicker than we did, but we got innumerable recommendations from various folks. Nothing seemed to help. And then a year and a half, 2 years ago, with Sarah's help, CAFF's help, and Farm Advisor's help, we identified the nematode problem in that back block. So this year, with CAFF and a Healthy Soils grant, we did a mustard cover crop mix in that back block to see if we can start getting the nematode numbers under control and start seeing some growth in the trees back there. These pictures you see here are when shortly after we planted. I think we planted almost right after harvest. So beginning of November, I think we were probably planted by the 5th to 10th of November. We just, for seeding, we try not to do any tilling on the property. It's all mowed. But in order to get the cover crop in, we did do a light disking and then used a broadcast seeder to broadcast the crop and then rolled it after we broadcast it. And you can see we got a fairly, I'd say it's a pretty decent stand of mustard there. In terms of mowing it down or harvesting it, we decided this year, sounds like maybe we might regret it from what some of the other folks are saying, but we decided we would leave it in long enough to let it go to seed. So as you can see, the mustard crop it's probably up about at least 6 to 8 feet tall in the orchard. We've just started mowing it down this week, and we'll see how that goes. In the organic blocks, which is the picture on your right, we're doing an annual cover crop blend of peas, vetch, beans, for both soil tilth as well as adding organic matter as well as nutrients for the organic block. And then we're also, we mowed that down, I think it was about a month, well, 3 weeks to a month ago, after it had partially flowered, and then we came through with compost and spread compost on that field after mowing down the cover crop. The other thing we did last spring was when we did our follow-up mowing throughout the summer, we have solid set irrigation in there too. When we did our follow-up mowing throughout the season, we would mow every other row and let the in-between rows grow sufficiently to keep space for beneficials to stay in the orchard. I think that's about all I have to say. I'd certainly be glad to answer any questions either about the organic production or about dealing with nematodes. We're so new on the nematode issue, we don't have the results that Daniel has yet, but we're sure hoping we get them.
Thank you, Alan. Yes, experiment in progress, and hopefully we'll have some good results to share with folks as time goes on. Well, thanks to all our speakers. So we've had a number of questions come in, and I'm gonna share these with the speakers, and some of them are specific for folks, and some of them are more general. So feel free to chime in as we go along. So our first question is from Rex Dufour, who's with INCAT, in case folks don't know him. Rex says, I'm working in an orchard with a mix of 2-foot-high crimson clover and Persian clover. I'm wanting to let the cover crop go to flower for seed, but want to mow it in a couple of weeks to manage some tall weeds in the alley. What mowing height is ideal for not killing the clovers? I have a feeling Tom Johnson might have a recommendation for this question. Oh, I just unmuted you, Tom.
Okay, for this situation, in a couple of weeks, basically that clover is all going to start turning brown and melting down and maturing seed. So that would be the time that basically, yeah, you could go in and then mow it about a foot high, and you're not going to clip that much seed off or that many flowers off anymore, and you're going to be getting the weeds you're after. Now, in the alley, I'm hoping you mean in the middles or under the trees. But I would, you know, if you're going to do it in a couple weeks, you should be okay. Doing it right now, you would be clipping the crimson off and all the stuff that's flowering, and it just can't reseed itself after you've done that to it at this stage. The soil's running out of moisture. The plants have bloomed. They say, I'm making seed. I'm doing my job. What'd you do that to me for? So give it a couple weeks and then go ahead and go in and mow where you're just kind of barely brushing the top of the clover if you can.
Tom, I might also ask you to clarify, so hearing from the growers, it sounds like folks are trying a lot of different things. You know, we heard about roller crimping, we heard about multiple mowings, and I also know that plenty of folks, when they're starting out with cover crops, just go with the sort of the one-time termination strategy of maybe a mow and then incorporation. Could you kind of talk about the difference between choosing to terminate your cover crop on one day in the spring versus doing sort of multiple mowings like Nick was talking about?
Basically, so many people are so used to doing it one shot and you're done. That's that flexibility. Mowing it high and knocking it down early and letting grow back what's going to grow back increases the root work that's going on, increases the biology. One of the things they didn't mention, or our growers did mention a little bit, was what your sprinkler system is. If you're on a drip only system, you're farming two climates. you're farming an irrigated agriculture and you're farming the desert. So if you're solid set sprinklers, you're putting water on top of your residue. You can get away with probably having more residue to deal with, whether you crunched it down or you ground it up. But if you're drip only, you probably want to break that stuff down as early as you can so that it has time to decompose on what moisture's in the plants and what moisture's available. Because this is also the spring's turning into like it's probably going to stop raining and not rain again. So you don't want a hay pile in the middle of the thing out there. And a lot of them go out and mow it, and we touched on diesel fuel and time and horsepower. Those are things to consider as well. As Nick pointed out, hey, I can go out there and crunch that thing down with that rotary mower real quick, and I can come back and flail mow it later. So yeah, and he can go 6 miles an hour with the rotary mower or the roller crimper. But if you're out there flail mowing that stuff that's 6 foot tall, you're going about a mile an hour at the most. So those are the things that bring into that. So that's that flexibility. Think about what you want to get out of it and those things that are going to take to break that stuff down. So if you're solid set sprinklers or you're shaded and it's moist and you got wet soil and everything else, multiple mowings probably is a better way to go because there's continued root growth. And I had one of those thoughts that comes across your mind a while back here. And so I have to write it down. It says a cover crop has more to do with what goes on below the soil surface than what it does above it. But its success is often judged by what you can see above the soil. The cover crop is to feed the soil. And without a live soil, we're doing hydroponics. So what we're trying to do here is bring that soil back to life. So it's minimize effort, maximize return. If it means I got to go mow it 3 times, well, maybe it took the same amount of time, the same amount of diesel fuel to do it 3 times as it did to go out there and do it once when it was as great big as it was going to get. And you got your tractor's just barely big enough to run that thing. Okay, that's a strain. That's putting extra effort on that tractor. So I applaud the people that are looking at this type of thing. So many people, are used to the idea, well, it's going to get X big. I'm going to mow it and disc it in. Well, I'm also advocating of late in younger orchards. When you're first starting out, you ripped out the old one and you went through all the work and you put the new one back in. I'm telling these guys, you got 3 years to make up for 25 years of abuse. Because a lot of people have not been doing anything for their, in almonds especially, for their soil for the last life or the last planting. So you got 3 years to put some stuff back in the ground and get some life going back in the ground before you revert back to it's got to be a billiard ball table out there. So that's my take on it. It's a choice. I can't force you to do what's probably the best bet. But on the other hand, I can advise you that, hey, maybe let's go in and mow it high and come back and do it again later. Or let's let it just do what it's going to do and fall down. And in the case of the clovers, let it turn brown. Let it get all dried out. Then mow it. Then, yeah, you can go 4 miles an hour with your flail mower through that stuff. But if you went out there and it's a tangled, still kind of green, sticky hay out there, you're going to have a hard time flail mowing it. And you're also not going to get the seed yield back out of it that you would like to have. So that's a special cover crop compared to what we were looking at pictures of mostly today. So that's my opinion anyways.
Great, thank you, Tom. Our next question is for Daniel, but others might want to chime in after. So Dee Dee is wondering if you see much spread outside of the orchard of the cover crops that you're using, and have you considered using any native plant species?
I just got some soil samples back from Earth Fort Laboratories, and I had about an hour-long conversation with Matt Slaughter, who is the president of the company. And that is a biology lab, measures biology in the soil. And one of the main take-home things for my orchard was that I am probably, he says if I would change the crop from walnuts to corn or soybeans, he says my biology would look pristine. He says you're gonna have to, excuse me. He says you're gonna have to change your soil environment from bacterial to fungal. So I've got some work to do on that. Which basically what he said is go to the nearest wooded area near you and look what's growing in the understory as far as mowable, manageable crops, and plant that. He says that's going to encourage your fungal communities. So that being said, when you have your native plant species, you're going to have more of your native insect species also, which some of those are a problem and some of those are not. To have food for the good guys, you have to have bad guys. That's just the way nature works. And so to have a few bad guys isn't necessarily bad, because you want your good ones around. So I think that gets into another question about beneficial insect rows, which I'm planning on going in there and shredding some of my just periodic rows throughout my 190-acre orchard, and plant like 4 or 5 aisles of beneficial insect blend. And that's part of the reason why I left my cover crop going. Some of the rows that I have was so that we could host our beneficials, our beneficial blend up and starting to pollinate. So there would be a continuity of beneficial habitat out there.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to chime in on, I know this is a question that comes up from time to time about why most cover crop species that are planted are non-native species as opposed to native ones that we find in our area. I know for my part, a big part of it is that, you want a cover crop that can outcompete your weeds, right? So the weeds have been adapted to the areas that they're growing in, and we want to select species that can actually perform well in the context of that competition and provide a myriad of benefits. There are certainly native species that we find in cover crop mixes and that just pop up, and those are great to encourage. But I think for the most part, cover crop seed that people are ordering, I would say you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Tom, but they're mostly non-native species, and where we find more native species is going to be in more of the pollinator mixes or you might plant a field border, for example, get some pollinator strips in there, some local native forage for beneficial insects as well. So you can do both, right? Somebody actually wrote in the chat box earlier that there are some people experimenting with having different cover crop mixes in different rows. So say maybe, every 10 rows you have an insectary mix that's really going to provide a lot of forage for the pollinators and the beneficials. And while, maybe the majority of the rows in the orchard are going to be more geared towards building soil health or providing nitrogen or water holding capacity, whatever kind of benefit you're looking for. So there's a lot you can play around with there.
I would say that basically we're kind of still looking at the tip of the iceberg of what we can use, what we can't use, how we can use what we have. Yeah, the reason we're using introduced species like vetches and peas and things like that is they perform. We know what they're going to do. They've been selected for that. The native plants a lot of times are going to be a California native versus the rest of the world native. So they're adapted to our climate. Well, they're also something that basically doesn't want to get cut off at a certain time of year when that might be something that we're going to cut off in our general management. If I'm going to go to the expense and time and effort of getting a lot of these perennial native species established, I really rather go into a hedgerow situation, or the set aside area or the road that's going to be designated to that. A lot of people when they're starting out will, I want to put that out, and then they find out that I got to mow the rest of it last week, but they're telling me I better not mow this for a month and a half. And it's, well, I won't have a mower in a month and a half. And I want to mow it. I got to do this. I got to do that. So it's fitting those plants into the management. I think as we go along and we can get our soil health built back up again, we can find these systems that are economically viable. In other words, the trees will drop enough nuts that we can make a living off of it. And we lessen our tillage and we do a whole lot of things, then some of those natives will start to come back. But we'll have to use the ones that we can manage in a way that fits the management style of what we're trying to grow. So you're not in something you're going to sweep up off the ground. You're not necessarily going to plant a lot of native grasses out there because they can make great big clumps that would be hard to get nuts out of and make a bumpy ride out there. Some of the lower lying things, some of the flowers and things like that, and a lot of the California things that are attractive to our beneficial insects are big shrubby bushes. You're not going to put that in the middle of your orchard. But having that habitat there, that bloom or that food source all year round is going to be important. So that's why the hedgerow idea really pays off. Once they get over the shock that I'm not going to have that one row of trees over there right against the road or along the ditch or whatever type of thing. It's a subspecies of cover cropping is you're setting that aside and you're farming or managing it a little bit different. But it provides the benefits. Studies are showing even in the annual crops, they're finding, hey, if I plant one bed of flowers out there and I get them up and I get them going, I'm getting that benefit for as much as 300 feet in every direction from that one row, that one bed of flowers out there. It's just you got to make sure that the help doesn't go spray it out and it doesn't get cultivated out, or it gets kind of took care of a little bit different, so it's there. It's one more management thing, and I'm sure Nick and I'm sure Daniel and Alan would all say, the less management I have to do, the less details I have to keep track of, the better off I'm going to be until I get everybody on board and everybody understands what we're trying to do, and they don't go spray my hedgerow and kill it while it's all little plants type of thing. Yes, sir.
I would add, we did put a hedgerow in around the perimeter of our farm probably 10 years ago now. And first year or two, it was significant maintenance and upkeep to get it established. But I'd say the last 2 or 3 years, it's pretty much on its own, very few replants, and the life around that hedgerow is visible.
Yeah, it makes a tremendous difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really great suggestion, and I'll give a shameless plug that CAFF actually has a hedgerow manual that I'm happy to share with folks. If you want us to send you a digital copy, I'm happy to share that. There's a lot of good examples, recommendations, resources, and pictures. All right, our next question is for Nick. Nick, excuse me. Matt is wondering when you seed your cover crop. He says that he seeded after harvest this year. waited for rainfall to germinate, but the first storm was so much rain that a lot of the seed washed away. Is it possible to seed the cover crop before harvest and then get it to germinate with the post-harvest irrigation?
Okay, so I'm not sure what crop he's planting into, but we have some different situations. Our goal is to try to plant all of our acres to cover crops. After doing it year after year, we've seen the benefits, and it's just a kind of a goal we set up. And last year we weren't able to because it started raining early, I guess kind of late winter, and just we couldn't get anything planted after a certain point. We started in our walnuts because we have solid sprinklers out there. So with our walnuts, basically, as soon as we finish harvesting, we can turn water on and get the soil into a condition that we can plant into and that will germinate the seeds. So we usually run the sprinklers just long enough where we can wait a couple days, go in and plant, and then turn the sprinklers back on. So we have kind of total control of when we plant the walnuts. On young walnuts, we could even, if they're not going to be harvested, we can even plant before harvest or during harvest. Pistachios and the almonds, we have those on drip, and we're kind of at the mercy of the rain to decide when we can plant. So we kind of need to get one good rain in. On fields that we haven't had cover crops in before, we definitely have to have rain. Where we've had cover crops and there's actually residue, and we had success establishing cover crops, usually the top couple inches of soil have so much root mass still there that we can get our no-till planter to plant into it and get the seed covered, and then we just wait for the rain. So it kind of just depends on the situation and the year. And this year we were able to get all of our walnuts and pistachios planted, and then we got into almonds, and it had already rained quite a bit, and we planted some almonds a little wetter than we wanted to, and still got a crop to be established. But we didn't get a lot of biomass from it, but I still saw benefits from having it there. But we didn't get across very many acres of almonds because by the time the conditions were right, then it just started raining too much and we couldn't get in. It seemed like this year, every time it would rain, it would be too wet to plant, and we'd have about a day where we could plant or think about starting to plant, and then there was rain in the forecast for the next day. And so we weren't able to get it all done. So depending on the situation and the irrigation, that kind of thing, that kind of dictates when you can go plant. We've had, with those mixes, we've had especially with like a crop like triticale and some of the small grains, we've had a lot of success actually getting those established pretty late. Like I've planted peas and radish, that, a blend that we got from Tom. I think it was 2 years ago when it was a really wet spring, and I had a chance like at the end of February to go plant it, and it got established and made a pretty good crop. So some of those crops you can plant right through the winter and into early spring. The later you get, if you don't have an irrigation system that covers the area that's planted, the later you get, then there's the chance that it doesn't germinate, or you get it growing and then you don't get any rain and you don't get a lot of benefit from it. So I hope that helps.
Thanks, Nick. I would also add that I don't think he's on this call, but I know a grower in Yolo County who is also a walnut grower, and he does broadcast seed before harvest. And this is something he's continuing to sort of experiment with. So I don't want to speak on his behalf, but I think from what I've heard so far, he's done it 2 years and it's worked well, because as the harvest equipment gets in there, it kind of presses the seed in the soil and moves around the soil a little bit. But if you'd like to follow, I can connect you with that grower, Matt, if you wanna email me after the webinar. Our next question is asking about about cover crops in further down in the Central Valley, in the San Joaquin Valley, where there's a lot less rain. I know, Tom, you mentioned a little bit about, especially when you're on drip, you're really farming in two different ecosystems. And I know that water is a big concern for a lot of folks that grow cover crops. So would you be willing to comment on kind of water demand and how to think about that with cover crops where it's drier?
Yeah, the last study I've seen done was done back in the 80s in a walnut orchard. And they came up with that a cover crop that they went all the way to maturity, which was Brando brome and clovers and things like that. So it's an annual cover crop. It used about 10% more water than no cover crop at all from what fell out of the sky. So it does compete to a certain extent with your trees for the available soil moisture. And in that case, that is one of those key factors in deciding when you're going to terminate that thing. It's like, okay, the little old lady at the end of the block says it's not going to rain anymore this spring. Then you go look at your cover crop and you go look at your trees and you go, okay, well, I probably should take that down so it stops transpiring. I'd like to get as much as I can out of it, but that's that fine point. Do I let it go another 3 weeks and take that extra moisture up and then I don't have it? Or do I terminate now while the soil is moist enough, if I'm in a vineyard or an orchard where I'm incorporating it and ground soft enough I can get the disc in the ground? And what some people or growers that we have here and other growers are finding, though, is after they've had a cover crop for a few years, that dynamic starts to change a little bit. That soil seems to hold water a little better. Maybe you can let that thing go a little while longer. So it comes down to what you're going to put in. And if you come to me or you come to your advisor and tell them, hey, I want to try this, we're going to try and dial what's in that mix to your climate and what you're expecting out of it. Because what we would send to Kern County is going to be different than what we would send to Fresno County, which is going to be different than what we would send to San Joaquin County, which is going to be different than what we would send to Colusa County. Because as you move north in the Central Valley, incrementally about every 50 miles, you gain another inch of rainfall, average. So, Kern County, 4 inches of rain. We need to be there the afternoon it falls. Colusa County, they may get 4 inches of rain in one afternoon. So there's those things that go into that thing. So, we would not necessarily use the same product in Wheeler Ridge as we would in Princeton. We do make mixes that supposedly go everywhere, but then that's the expectation that, okay, you're going to get what you get out of it and call it good.
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah. Can I add a comment there?
Go ahead, yeah.
Nature cycles water very efficiently. Evaporation off of a bare soil surface is a lot more detrimental than growing a crop on it. And if we can cover the soil with plant material, stabilize our ecological climate on the soil surface, everything is a lot more happy. In terms of biology, nutrient cycle, disease, when you keep things at your weed spectrum is less, and for every 1% organic matter increase in your soil, you will hold between 18 and 22,000 gallons more water per acre in the soil structure itself. So What I'm saying is in the San Joaquin Valley, where they have sandboxes everywhere, that's what they have fields of, basically, for the most part, is sand. If they can start planting something in there, use a little extra water to begin with, they may need to buy a little bit more water or pump a little bit more water, but if they can increase their organic matter, that's going to be a non-issue essentially in the long run, I think. If you have adequate pore space in the soil and soil structure, your nature was designed to hold water in the soil. So when it comes to the San Joaquin, I would say, this would be my personal opinion now, but I would say focus on increasing your organic matter in sandy soils so that you can increase your water holding capacity. That'll make a lot more difference on your cover cropping strategies. And these cover cropping things, they're not a science. I mean, yeah, to a certain extent, they're a science, but they're not a science. You're gonna have to take and tailor make your cover cropping plan or whatever kind of as you go to accommodate your workload that comes in. So if I all of a sudden have to go through and check sprinklers, that's, you know, let's say through cover crop that's 4 to 6 feet tall, that's just a disaster. You're going to have to do something about that. I mean, it's just a practical call. So anyway, that's just some thoughts.
Thanks, Daniel. That's kind of all the time we have for now for questions. But I did want to just wrap up real quickly and share a quick slide with you all to kind of show some of the financial incentives opportunities for cover cropping. You know, if you haven't cover crop before, or you're thinking about cover cropping a new area, getting some money for seed or the practice can help kind of make it a little bit worth your while. So there's a few different options out there. The Healthy Soils program is a California state program that you can get a decent rate for planting a cover crop for 3 years. You can also do the cost share programs, EQIP and CSP through the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And I'm actually going to have, see if I could do this at the same time. I'm going to have Billy Sink briefly talk about the Seeds for Bees program. Well, looks like I'm going to have to stop sharing. Before I do that, actually, though, I'm going to just to remind folks that that there is, we're going to be sending out an email with a video link to the webinar, as well as some cover crop resources. CAFF is actually in the middle of finishing up some really nice publications about deciding about your cover crop, what cover crop to plant, for what reasons, that sort of thing, how to address risk. So stay tuned for that. And also just a reminder, please do fill out our evaluation. And, you know, as you move further in planting cover crops, in trying different things, even if you're doing it for the first time, feel free to reach out to us at CAFF. And we also really encourage folks to connect with their local resource conservation district or NRCS office. Let your cover crop advisor know you're interested. There's a lot of folks out there that can kind of support the learning process, and I think everyone can agree it is a learning process. With that, I did want to just have Billy Sink mention real quick about the Seeds for Bees program. Billy, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm not even going to share my screen. I just want to be real quick. There will be some information included with the video that Sara is going to send out. My name is Billy Sink, and I manage the Seeds for Bees program. This is an opportunity to get free cover crop seed. We primarily have worked with orchardists, but we've also found that these mixes work really well in walnuts, pistachios, prunes, cherries, etc. So anyone that's interested should definitely contact me. Open enrollment starts June 15th, but I'm always here for any questions you might have.
Great, thank you, Billy. Yeah, so as Billy mentioned, we'll be sending out an email. And if you have questions for the speakers, we're happy to funnel questions in their directions. And yeah, please feel free to get in touch. Let us know how we're doing. So the idea anyway, since we can't have our in-person spring field days, is that we're gonna continue having these webinars from time to time. They will focus on, we'll try to focus on kind of one issue at a time. So this time we did spring management. Another time we'll probably do nitrogen budgeting for folks that are planting cover crops for nitrogen. We'll do one on seed selection, etc. And I think we're all hoping that we're going to be able to do this again in person before too long. But in the meantime, I think it's great to have some space to be able to hear from experienced growers, hear from people like Tom with such a wealth of knowledge on cover crops, and just keep the conversation going. So thank you all for joining us, and we hope that you're all staying safe and healthy, and also maintaining your sanity in these strange times. All right, everyone, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank
Bye.
you all.
Thank